The Allen Lund Company thanks all the hard-working drivers who are moving goods across the country. We can't do it without you.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
When it comes to factoring, you have to take a lot of things into account to ensure that you keep yourself and your business safe. We speak with OOIDA's Advocacy Council about the International Factoring Association and how to spot red flags in factoring companies. What documents do you need in order to file your taxes? What are the actions you need to take so that you're prepared when it comes time to fill out those forms? The fact is, paperwork is a necessary part of running your own business, and it's something that could put money back into your pocket instead of the IRS's. I'll talk over some of the details with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. And finally, the U.S. Department of Labor recently issued a final rule to define who is and is not an independent contractor. That rule has raised concerns among many independent contractors in the trucking industry. So what does the rule say, and what does it mean? I'll get a rundown from Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. A final rule that seeks to require emergency braking systems on light vehicles has been sent to the White House Office of Management and Budget for review, and the heavy-duty vehicle version likely isn't far behind. Last June, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration issued a notice of proposed rulemaking to require automatic emergency braking systems on new light vehicles. NHTSA projected that a mandate would save at least 360 lives a year and reduce annual injuries by at least 24,000. If the rule is adopted as proposed, nearly all new U.S. vehicles weighing less than 10,000 pounds will be required to have AEB technology 3 years after it is published in the Federal Register. That could come as soon as this spring. A proposal was also issued with similar language for vehicles weighing more than 10,000 pounds, including all Class 7 and Class 8 vehicles. There would not be any retrofit requirements on existing heavy vehicles. The heavy vehicle final rule also is projected to be released this spring. However, it still has not been sent to OMB for review. Several lawmakers spoke out against the AEB proposal for trucks at a House Transportation and Infrastructure hearing in December. Representative Mike Collins of Georgia, who owns a trucking company, told NHTSA and FMCSA leaders that the technology isn't ready.
You're talking to a trucker. I'm in the trucking business. As a matter of fact, I probably own about 80 trucks with the collision avoidance device, is what we call it, on the front of them. And I will tell you, they are not bulletproof. They're nowhere near it. And are you aware of what happens when this device goes off at 50, 60 miles an hour?
Yes.
If you're not wearing a seatbelt, it'll put you to the windshield almost. And it's not there. The technology is not there. And I don't understand why the federal agencies, the FMCSA or NHT, either one of you, push programs. I'm much like Mr. Massey. Listen, we all want to be safe. That's why I tried them. But they don't work perfectly yet, and they're very expensive. As a matter of fact, you can't disable them, so you can't get parts for them right now. So you know what you do? You wind up parking the vehicle. So you're pushing standards that the technology is not available. And I really want you to understand that. I'm not trying to be ugly or anything. I'm just telling you from someone in the industry, that's my outlook on it.
The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association also opposes the proposal. The association has told the agencies that drivers are experiencing way too many false activations with AEB systems. Changes are coming to the Medical Examiner's Handbook, the advisory criteria given to examiners offering CDL medical certification. In a final rule published to the Federal Register, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration announced a number of amendments to a section of the handbook that regulates physical qualifications for drivers. In total, 11 of the 13 medical criteria covered under federal code were edited to remove any information that was outdated, obsolete, or no longer relevant. There are new recommendations regarding elevated blood pressure and medical certification, along with definitions of the varying stages of hypertension. Individuals with stage 1 hypertension may may be medically certified to drive for a 1-year period, with certification examinations done annually. Those with stage 2 hypertension may be given a one-time certification of 3 months to initiate or adjust medications. If that treatment works, the driver may be certified for 1 year. If it doesn't, a driver could be disqualified. There are other clarifications as well, from pacemakers and the loss of limbs to epilepsy and more. FMCSA stressed that the changes are meant to help medical examiners assess a driver's physical qualification, are strictly advisory in nature, and do not have the force and effect of law. Winter weather continues battering parts of the country, leading to emergency declarations that apply to commercial drivers. Montana and North Dakota are the latest states to put emergency orders into effect. Supply chain disruptions are one reason for the declaration in Montana. State officials say conditions have caused an increased short-term demand for propane and heating oil. To help, hours of service, registration, and weight regulations for drivers and vehicles hauling heating fuels have been waived through February 1st. In North Dakota, it's a similar problem and a similar order, waiving certain regulations for motor carriers hauling fuel. These are just two of the latest states relaxing rules to address winter weather problems. For a full breakdown of the others, check out landline.media. More than 11,000 medium-duty Peterbilt and Kenworth trucks are the subject of a new recall. It's over a problem with the cab mirror. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says the mirror glass is susceptible to detaching, reducing driver visibility. The problem affects some Peterbilt 535, 536, 537, and 548 trucks, as well as a number of Kenworth T180, T280, T380, and T480 trucks, model years 2022 to 2024. Fixes will be done free of charge. Contact Kenworth or Peterbilt customer service with questions. A new report reveals that although the adoption of zero direct emission trucks is on a rapid rise, the number of zero direct emission heavy-duty trucks on the road remains small. CalSTART recently published a report outlining the state of the zero direct emission truck market in the United States. That includes heavy trucks as well as others like cargo vans, medium-duty trucks, and yard tractor vehicles, among others. As of this past June, more than 17,500 zero direct emission trucks had been deployed in the U.S., more than 80% of which were cargo vans. Heavy-duty trucks, which included Class 7 and 8 vehicles, made up less than 5% of that fleet. Meanwhile, fewer than 900 heavy-duty zero direct emission trucks had been deployed, a market share of just 0.02% for the heavy-duty truck segment. Most of them were being deployed in urban, regional, or drayage operations. Expect all these numbers to grow, though. In 2019, there were only a few dozen zero direct emission truck models available. There are currently more than 160 models on the market, and more carriers are committing to going electric. That's despite obstacles, of course, such as a lack of a national charging infrastructure. And finally, free registration for the Mid-America Trucking Show is now open. That goes for visitors to the show, which runs for 3 days starting March 21st at the Kentucky Expo Center in Louisville. Nearly 900 exhibitors and more than 55,000 people are expected for the 52nd edition of MATS. Free early bird registration ends February 28th. Organizers have said they're still looking for speakers on a range of subject matters, including equipment, government regulations, operations, maintenance, technology, and more. For more information, head to truckingshow.com. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. If you'd like to support the OOIDA Mary Johnston Scholarship, you can donate to the fund. Send tax-deductible donations to OOIDA Foundation, Inc., 1 Northwest OOIDA Drive, Grain Valley, Missouri, 64029. Next, Ashley Blackford discusses factoring and the companies that offer it with OOIDA Advocacy Counsel Paul Torlina. I'll cover what documents you need to gather for taxes with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service, and we'll find out what the new independent contractor rule means for you from Bryce Mungin of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Paul Torlina joins me now. He is part of the Government Affairs Department at OOIDA. Paul, thank you for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Today we are talking about factoring agreements, and as always, we want to point out none of this is legal advice. Is that right?
That is 100% right. If you have questions about any discussion that we're having, you should consult your own attorney about your rights under any agreement. These are just illustrations to arm you with information to allow you to go forward in an educated way.
Now, before we get started, there's of course lots of things that can go into factoring agreements. What is OOIDA's position on factoring?
OOIDA will always tell you don't factor if you don't have to. For decades, OOIDA has said once you begin factoring, in our experience, you have more than likely started the clock on trouble for your business and its financial viability.
How has factoring grown over the years?
Factoring has changed a lot in the last probably 10 to 15 years. Probably even more accurately, I would say in the last 5 years, it has really evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Factoring many years ago was viewed as payday loan operation or predatory lending type of business. These days, it looks a lot more like what I would say the best example is mortgage-backed securities. If you are familiar with those are what got us in trouble in the 2000s when the economic crash at the end of the 2000s took place. Mortgage-backed securities are not necessarily a bad thing, so I'm not trying to make factoring sound like it's predatory lending, but essentially what has happened is that factoring companies have figured out ways to package factored loads or other factored accounts that they do with even non-trucking industries, package them as securities that they can sell to investors and make a profit off of. And so that's where factoring has gone today, is that it's a lot more of a Wall Street operation than it is a old back office dumpy place in the middle of nowhere that is looking to prey on the weak. It's a legitimate financial investment type of business these days.
Now, of course, as you mentioned, OOIDA doesn't encourage factoring, doesn't promote it. But not using a factoring company isn't always possible for some. How do you find a good factoring company if that's what you do need?
Sure. There is a realistic possibility that factoring can be of a benefit to your business, or it's just what your circumstances have put you in. And if that's the case, there are what we would call, quote, good factoring companies out there, and there are most certainly abusive ones out there. So if you want to find out who the best ones are, OOIDA can help you, but the best resource out there is going to be the International Factoring Association. They have a website, or you can call them, and you can directly engage the IFA and ask them which companies are members. I'm talking to this company. Are they a member, et cetera. And the reason that matters is that the IFA is kind of the police for factoring companies. They have a code of conduct and they have an ethical code that their members are required to follow. And if they get reports that a member is not following those or is engaging in shady practices, they will investigate. And we know of at least one company, and I'm not going to get into company names here, but we know of at least one company that's been expelled from the IFA. And we know of at least one company that has been repeatedly denied membership to the IFA because of the provisions in their factoring agreements that are considered abusive or unethical. So number one line of defense is call the IFA, find out what you can find out about the company that you're considering working with.
And if that company isn't a part of that association, might be a red flag if they're not.
Yes. If they're not a member of that association, they can give you a list of all of their members, and you're free to go and do your research and find one of the members on their list that you can engage to become your partner in factoring if that's the route you want to go.
What are some unfavorable terms that some factoring agreements could have in them?
The one that I see that's the most abusive or predatory is the cancellation or automatic renewal provision. And this one gets sticky with some of the agreements that we've seen because they contain small windows that say you have X number of days before the agreement expires to cancel. That's really not a problem by itself. Other ones will say that if you don't do anything, it automatically renews. That's not really a problem by itself. The sticky, unethical practice that we see in unfavorable terms when it comes to cancellation and automatic renewal is an owner-operator will do exactly what they're supposed to do to cancel. They'll give the written notice in the window that they're supposed to give it in. But there's a part of the provision that also says if you factor another load with that same factoring company after you gave the notice to cancel, it's considered a revocation of your cancellation, and you've renewed the agreement again. So let's say an agreement says that within 90 days of expiration, you have to cancel in writing, and you do that. And then 45 days later, you get another load and you factor it with the same company that you just canceled with. That company, if they have that provision in their agreement, is going to say, not only did your cancellation just get canceled, which sounds really confusing, but you've also now renewed the agreement on this 45th day for another year. So you're not out. You're stuck with us again for another year to that date. And then it just gets confusing, and you're stuck, and you're prone to more abuse. So that's really the big one that we see.
Now, a lot of us, of course, use our cell phones for everything. We've, heard it's not uncommon for truck drivers to make inquiries on their mobile devices about factoring companies. What are some dangers when it comes to doing that?
Yeah, there's two. And just to kind of back up, one of the other kind of provisions that we see in these agreements that I did not describe is many of them will provide that when you enter into the agreement with the factoring company, you're granting them power of attorney to take action on your behalf and do anything that you as an owner-operator would be authorized to do. Now, that ties in with the mobile device because many of us today operate on our phones. You might pull over at a stop. You might be waiting to get loaded or unloaded, and you're on your phone. And you're doing your business on your phone, and maybe you've done an inquiry with a factoring company to find out what they can do for you, what their terms are going to be. And in order to get that information, you have to agree to a lot of things. Maybe you're even going through the process of a DocuSign or an electronic signature. You're checking boxes. You're clicking little buttons that say, I agree. We all do it when we go through these. I do it when I download an app to play hearts on my phone. It's just, it's very easy. It's the society we live in. But what a lot of unsuspecting owner-operators are finding out is when they're checking those boxes, they're granting power of attorney. Sometimes they're entering into a factoring agreement without knowing it. Oh, wow. So be super aware of what you're clicking on your phone, because the result sometimes that we've seen in our offices has been not only did you agree to whatever the factoring agreement terms are, but they also went out there and to protect themselves made some UCC filings on loads that you're going to run or that you're in the process of running that they might have a lien against in the future. The way that we see people finding that out is they had no idea until someone notifies them that there's a UCC lien out there against them. They don't even know they agreed to that when they were clicking on the things on their phone to try to get information about factoring. And again, that relates back to, are you dealing with an ethical company? Are you dealing with an IFA member? Typically what we're finding is that the people who are getting victimized by the phone inquiries are not dealing with an IFA member. They're dealing with a shady operation out there who has put them on the hook for something they had no intention of getting into by clicking on their phone while they were trying to get information about how to factor or whether they wanted to work with that company.
And, oftentimes when it comes to the terms and conditions, I know you mentioned it, I've done it, you just kind of click through, I accept, I agree. People tend to skip over those, but why is it important to read, all that fine print to make sure you do know what you're accepting and signing?
Sure. It's always important to know, for if nothing else, awareness of what you've gotten yourself into. And if you've heard me on this program before talking about contracts or what you can do, typically what you're going to find is a factoring company is not going to negotiate with you. They're not going to say, oh, you don't like that term? That's fine. We'll knock that term out, but we'll keep the rest of it in place. We're good. What they're typically going to do is say, take it or leave it, buddy. It's all yours, or you can just walk away from it. Now, in these situations where you're clicking on things and you're not reading them, what did you click on? Do you know what you did when you clicked on it? Do you know whether you entered an agreement, or did you just accept some terms and conditions to get some information? What the heck did you say when you said, I agree, and then clicked the accept button? And like we've both agreed here in our discussion today, we all do it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we all do it without reading any of it. Now, if I'm downloading the Hearts app onto my phone and I want to play some Hearts, the worst thing that's probably going to happen to me is somebody's going to ding me for like 99 cents or $4 for the app or whatever it might be. And then I figure it out and say, oh, I'm an idiot for letting that happen.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more on the line for our owner-operators out there, and they are not – I'm calling myself an idiot. They are not idiots for getting involved in these things. They're busy, they're stressed, they're tired, they're on the road, whatever it might be. And it gets easy to breeze through those things and say, oh, yeah, I'm just – I got to agree to this so I can see the next screen. So awareness is always the first defense. And a lot of times it's awareness of – not only what is in that agreement that might be unfavorable, but awareness of whether you entered into the agreement or not. Did I click agree and accept terms and enter into a contract with a factoring company? Or did I click those boxes just to get information? Those are two very different things that have huge financial impacts in two very different directions if you don't know.
What do you do if you're in a factoring contract and it's not a good one? What are your options?
Well, the first one is to get out of the agreement. As we discussed previously, that can be difficult if you're dealing with a shady factoring company. But unfortunately, sometimes you're just forced into the situation of having to bide your time and operate very carefully, tiptoeing through a minefield. You can always call the IFA if you're dealing with a factoring company and report them. Even if they're a non-member, that is something that the IFA takes seriously when it comes to, when I say non-member, I'm talking about non-member with IFA. I'm not talking about an OOIDA member here. If an IFA report comes in to them, they have advised us that they kind of keep a log on companies, and when they apply for membership, they have that log and say, company, you have 12 complaints about shady activity that violates our code of conduct. We're not going to take you.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the big picture for the good of society thing that you can do. Individually, if you have problems, you can always call our business services department here at OOIDA. They can help you work through issues with factoring companies. We've seen a lot of complaints lately about factoring companies requiring ELD data, and that doesn't seem to relate to anything factoring-wise. The factoring companies, we've engaged several of them, and a few times we've locked horns with them, and a few times we've had friendly conversations. What we've found universally, and the IFA actually has kind of taken a position on this as well, is that the ELD data that they're asking for is an effort to prevent broker fraud. It's a way to say, okay, this load is actually getting delivered, or this load is real and it got shipped and delivered somewhere. So that is something that we've done over time to try to combat what seemed like a shady practice at first. And then once it was discussed, whether it was locking horns or in a friendly discussion with our business services department reaching out, it's a way for them to suss out whether that's a real thing, whether that's an ethical practice. But business services here at OOIDA offers several other options and ways that you can consult with them about provisions in your factoring agreement or conduct from a factoring company that you have questions about.
All right. Paul, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
If you have any questions, you can contact Business Services at OOIDA at 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now, 855-976-4291.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy when your truck on a CAT scale.
Landline Now, welcome back. What documents do you need in order to file your taxes? What are the actions you need to take so that you're prepared when it comes time to fill out those forms? The fact is, paperwork is a necessary part of running your own business, and it's something that can put money back in your pocket instead of the IRS's. To get the information you need, I called Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service. Well, Shasta, let's start with broadly what documents are needed in order to be ready for tax preparation. I mean, what should you be gathering up right now?
Well, January is the ideal time to confirm you've got everything you need for the preparation of your 23 tax return. And there's a lot of stuff. Okay. So it's a little bit of a chore, but it's well worth it. I've got a little list here and we will just go down that list. You want to make sure you have, all your settlements. If you are using a card provided by a carrier, you want to make sure you have all the activity statements for what's on that card. You want to make sure you have all your bank statements. You want to make sure you have all of your credit card statements, all your receipts for cash purchases. If you're taking a home office deduction, you want to gather all your utility bills. You want to measure that your space for your home office. And you also want to have copies of any and all equipment transactions for that tax year. Any equipment bought, sold, traded, leased, everything. You need copies of everything for any transactions. So that is vital. You want to figure out the business interest you paid for the year. So that means on any business loans, any equipment loans, credit card interest for business credit cards. So nothing personal. You cannot take any kind of interest on a credit card with personal expenses. But if it's strictly business, you get to take that interest that you paid throughout the year on that credit card. So that's important to gather all of that. If you're taking a deduction for business miles on your personal vehicle, you want to absolutely, as soon as possible, get an odometer reading. You want to do that at the beginning and end of each year because we'll need to know the total number of miles that you put on that vehicle for the year and then the number of business miles for that year. So you want to get that all together. You want to be sure that you compute all your days away from home overnight working for per diem. You want to make a list of any estimated taxes you paid for 2023. You want to make sure as your income statements come in, 1099s, K1s, W-2s, Social Security payments, any income, you want to make sure you gather that and verify that. If you are paying mortgage interest, property tax, you'll need those documents. Escrow statements for any purchase, sale, or refinance of property. And then any non-reimbursed medical, dental expenses, and confirmation from any charities for donations. So that's really the crux of what you're going to need. And you want to get those things together as soon as possible. Like you won't be getting all your tax documents until February. Everyone has till January 31st to mail those out, but you can start gathering everything else. And then as those tax documents come in, the income statements, interest, dividend income, gambling winnings, all that stuff, then you can verify those numbers and make sure those match your records.
Okay. What about state tax refunds from the previous years? That's something you need to have?
Yes, we absolutely have to have that as well. Thank you.
And previous year's tax returns, I know some tax preparers, they just have those on record, but is that something you need to have handy? And what sort of information might you need off that?
If you're changing tax preparers this year, they will request a copy of your 2022 tax return because we want to see your tax history. We definitely want to have a copy of a a detailed depreciation schedule if you're in the midst of depreciating equipment, because however that schedule started, we have to adhere to that schedule. So we're going to have that detailed schedule, and that's usually with the tax return. So you want to verify that you have that included with the tax return. If you don't, you want to call the prior tax preparer and get that copy, because we definitely need that. So a lot of things carry over. So we want to make sure we're not missing anything. If you're going to go to the same tax preparer you used for the previous year, then they'll have that on record, and that won't be a problem. It's just if you're changing tax preparers this year.
I want to go into some more detail on some of these. And one of them that I always like to ask about is the home office deduction. Is this still a problematic thing to deduct?
It's not. I think everyone who has a home office should absolutely take this deduction. It is a deduction that has been exploited in the past. So you want to be conservative. What you have to understand is if you have a room that you're using as a home office, it's only the specific area of that room that's for business use. So if you have a guest bed in there, or if you have a pool table or something else in that room, you can't include that square footage. So that's where a lot of people run into a problem. They say, oh, I use this whole room, but really it also doubles sometimes as a guest room, or you store personal things in there, or there's a lot of different scenarios where the IRS is not going to be okay with that. So they want it to be exclusively used for business. So that's the exact square footage. So say half the room is business. So you measure the square footage of that half of the room where the desk is, and the file cabinet and the printer and et cetera. That area you are legitimately allowed to take, and you should.
Business miles on personal vehicles. I know there's a lot of different ways to track this. I know you need the business miles and the total miles. But as far as tracking the business miles, is it just that you need the odometer readings, or are there alternative ways that you can track that information?
See, what you've got to do, we need to know the total miles on that vehicle. So let's say 10,000. And of those miles, we need to know specifically what are business miles. So business miles are going to be, picking up truck parts, picking up truck supplies, those types of trips that you're making with your vehicle. Those are business miles. So you've got to log those miles. You've got to have some little notebook in the glove box. And when you're going to wherever to pick up parts, you track that mileage to and from, and truck supplies, etc. So you want to have that record. So if you are ever questioned, audited, that you have that substantiation, that backup for that deduction that you're taking. The business mile, it's a good deduction. It's 65.5 cents per mile. So that really adds up. If you are taking a home office deduction, but only if you're taking a home office deduction, you can also take the miles to and from your truck. So let's say your truck is parked off-site somewhere, that's a little bit of a trek. You can keep the track of those miles to and from the truck, because you're going from one business location to another business location. So that also we can include. So these things throughout the year, it adds up to a really nice deduction. You don't want to miss that.
Okay. I want to go back to settlement statements, because you've always noted that is something important to have in hand. But what information are we looking to get off of those, off of that paperwork?
Number one, all your income is reported on those settlement statements, and you can use those to verify what's reported on your 1099. So that's important. Also, there are a lot of expenses on there. There may be fuel, maintenance, all kinds of expenses that you want to make sure are pulled off that settlement, and you're getting those deductions. If you've been doing bookkeeping throughout the year, then you're good to go, because you already have all that information. But if you haven't, and you've got to sit down, there's all that information. It's going to take a minute to get that all together. So you want to, number one, make sure you have every single settlement for the year. And then you've got to sit down and pull off all those expenses and total those, because you do not want to miss any deductions. Every deduction saves you money. That's more money in your pocket, the more deductions that you're able to locate and identify.
Going back to estimated tax payments, I know that, of course, we've talked about how you need to be filing those every quarter when they're due. But when you get to the annual tax filing, what kind of paperwork do you need from those? I mean, you filled out forms. Do you need to keep a copy of those forms? Does a canceled check do the job?
Yes, absolutely. You want to keep track because when we file the return, we are notifying the IRS with this taxpayer has made these payments on these specific dates for these amounts for the tax year. So we want to make sure that we have the date, the amount, that it was sent in so we can report that. And then we're going to take that credit while we're preparing the tax return. So you want to make sure that you've got those records and that they're accurate.
Okay. Now, some of our folks are working as a sole proprietor. Some of them have organized into some sort of corporate form like an S Corp or an LLC. Is there any special paperwork that you need to have if your trucking business is organized as one of those, as opposed to a sole proprietorship?
Yes. When you're in a partnership or a multi-member LLC or corporation, you're going to be receiving what's called a K-1 from the business. So that tax return has to be done first. The business return must be done first so that you have that K-1. That is essentially your income report, your profit that you're going to be reporting on your personal returns. So you can't complete your personal tax filing until you get the business return filed. So it's very important that if you are involved in any of those types of businesses that that you're getting those done quickly so that you can get your K-1 if you're wanting to file by April 15th. So you want to make sure those get done. Typically with partnerships, multi-member LLCs, corporations, the filing deadline is March 15th. So it's a month before the personal filing deadline. So you've got to kind of giddy up on that. Also, if you are going to a tax preparer for the first time and they haven't done your LLC or corporation or partnership, they're going to want to see, obviously a copy of the prior year's return, but with LLCs and corporations, we want to see your articles of incorporation or your articles of organization from the LLC or the corporation. So those are records that you want to have for that new tax preparer.
Now, once you have all this paperwork, are there some suggested ways to organize it that will help your tax preparer?
Yes, absolutely. Most tax preparers likely have a tax organizer or tax worksheet they send out to clients to help them to gather the appropriate information. And you can kind of use it as a guide in getting all the information together. It will list out what's needed from top to bottom. And if you haven't received one, I would call your tax preparer and ask them, to make sure that you get a copy of that. We send out what we call a tax organizer. Anyone's welcome to call us and request a copy of that. But most preparers will have their own that they like to use and follow. And if you're going to a tax preparer that's trucking specific, that's a huge help because they're going to detail everything specific to trucking that you're going to need.
Well, Shasta, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I've been talking with Shasta May of MBA Tax and Bookkeeping Service about what kinds of documents you need to have ready in order to successfully file your taxes. If you have questions about this or other tax matters, you can contact Shasta May by calling 1-888-407-1669, by email at smay@mbataxhelp.com, or by going to the company's website, mbataxhelp.com. We'll have all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box, and you'll find all the email addresses, website links, and phone numbers we mention on the show, plus links to related articles. I'm Mark Redigan. This is Landline Now.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit Howe'sProducts.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. The U.S. Department of Labor recently issued a final rule to define who is and who is not an independent contractor. That rule has raised many concerns among independent contractors in the trucking industry. So what does the rule say, and what does it mean? Here to give us a rundown on some of the details is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how are you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Very well, thank you. I want to take a look at some of the issues concerning truckers in regard to this. And one of the big ones that it might, put in place something like California's ABC test.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, just for those who aren't familiar or may have forgotten, can you review what the ABC test is and what the concerns with it are?
Yeah, so the ABC test is the worker classification rule that was implemented in California with AB5. And basically it presumes every worker is an employee unless you can satisfy these three prongs. That's where the ABC comes from, the A prong, B prong, C prong. What's problematic about that test for trucking and owner-operators is that the B prong says you have to basically be doing work that's different than the hiring entity. So if you are doing the same kind of work as the person who's hiring you, you're an employee. Obviously, this is oversimplifying it, but basically the ABC test makes it very difficult to see how leased owner-operators can continue in the state of California. So to be clear, and there's still ongoing court challenges that we're a part of to this law in California, that is limited to California. And that's kind of what the concern is what's going on the federal level here.
So what does the new Department of Labor rule contain, if anything, regarding something like the ABC test?
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying we'll do our best to cover what we can. This was, over 300-page rule, so there's a lot of information, and we're doing our best to distill it and get straight answers as we can. But the one thing that the Department of Labor says throughout this final rule is that this rule is not implementing the ABC test, and they don't believe they have the authority to do so. So this rule is not the ABC test. And in general, what the Department of Labor says it's trying to do is return to the classification standards for the Fair Labor Standards Act that were in place prior to 2021 when the Trump administration issued their rule. So as simply as you can kind of put it is, they're not doing the ABC test, and what they're trying to do is go back to what was in place before.
So let's take a few examples within trucking. What sort of changes, if any, would the rule make for either company drivers or owner-operators on their own authority?
Yeah, and so those are the two clearest cases under this rule, and it shouldn't result in any changes. If you're a single truck owner-operator operating under your own authority, you're pretty clearly your own business. If you're working with brokers, if you're working with other businesses directly to negotiate transportation services, that's the kind of stuff that should be pretty clearly, an independent contractor or just your own business under this rule. Same thing goes for employee. If you're already an employee, this shouldn't change much. The couple of the questions or uncertainty kind of comes up around the independent contractor question, but for employees, it should stay the same.
So let's get to the muddy part here. We got the clear part out of the way.
Yeah.
And that is, what about leased-on truckers, those leasing onto a motor carrier and operating under their authority? What sort of an effect does it have there?
Yeah, and so, again, I'll preface this by saying it's going to depend on everyone's specific situation, but by and large, we don't believe this should change much for leased-on owner-operators. And that's because the rule states throughout, again, that they're trying to return to what was in place, what had been in place up until 2021. And by and large, leased-on owner-operators have been able to operate as independent contractors throughout that entire time. As I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit, you can get down into the details of how this test works. Basically, it's a test that has a couple factors, and you have to look at, does each factor weigh in favor of someone being an independent contractor or an employee? But as we've looked at it, it seems like most of the time for leased on owner operators, that should tilt in favor of being an independent contractor. And it seems pretty clear that there's nothing in the rule that's going to prohibit or make it extremely difficult for someone to be an independent contractor as a leased on owner operator. So again, that concern with the AB5 in California was the ABC test basically makes it impossible to be a leased on owner operator and operate as an independent contractor. With this rule, there seems to be plenty of ways that leased owner operators can continue to operate as independent contractors.
You mentioned the factors that they look at in this rule to determine who is what.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you can give us a few examples of the factors they are going to look at.
Yeah, so some of the things that some of the factors are, does the worker have opportunity for profit or loss depending on their management and decision-making skills? So basically, can you turn a profit based on your skills or how you run the business and not just working more hours? They're also going to look at, does the worker have capital investment in their own equipment? And for the trucking industry, a good example of that is an investment in, your tractor, your trailer, the other equipment that you use to operate your business. They also look at the type of control and how much control the hiring business has over the worker. So does the hiring business control when and how the worker does their work? Can the worker decide what jobs to take, when they want to do them, how they want to do those jobs? And another factor that's important is what type of skill and initiative the worker uses to do the work. So in the case of trucking and using a CDL, that's the kind of stuff that the rule says can weigh in favor of being an independent contractor because you're using specialized skills. So those are just 3 of them. There's 6 factors overall. And I think what's really important to mention with this test is that no one factor is deciding. So again, I'll refer to the ABC test because I think that's what so many people are familiar with. With the ABC test, you have to satisfy each and every one of those 3 prongs in order to potentially be an independent contractor. With this test, you do not. It looks at all the factors. It looks at all the different, the factors of the specific situation, and then makes the determination on whether you're an independent contractor or an employee. So it's not, hard and fast like the ABC test is.
You mentioned that the purpose here in putting out this rule was to return to the old rules before the Trump administration made some changes. In kind of a general overall sense, does it do that successfully?
It definitely seems closer than the Trump rule was to what practices were in place before. And I think the most notable example of that is the Trump rule. They placed a special emphasis on 2 factors. So the Trump rule kind of boiled it down to 5 factors instead of 6. And they said the control factor and the opportunity for profit or loss factor, those are probably going to be more determinative than the other factors. And what the Biden administration has done here is said, we're going to return to what was in place before. They cited a lot of case law, previous cases involving worker classification, and said, no one factor has ever been more important as a rule. And so that's the what we're going to return to. So it does seem that this rule is more of a return to what was in place before the previous rule in 2021.
Okay. Well, Bryce, we've run out of time here. It's all very interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more.
Yeah,
but meanwhile,
there's a lot still to unpack with this.
Okie doke. Well, thank you very much for all the information. We sure appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
I've been talking with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, this was a Department of Labor rule. We hope that you commented. A lot of people did. And when these rules come up, you need to comment, and you also need to call your members of Congress about these issues. Now, you can call any member of Congress by dialing the U.S. Capitol switchboard at 202-224-3121. And of course, you can also contact your members of the House and Senate through the website fightingfortruckers.com, which also helps you when we have these important issues to make comments on them. Again, that website is fightingfortruckers.com. Thank you for joining our program today. We'll be back tomorrow with more. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
Chrome. And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.